Welcome to Home on Native Land, where our guests peer into the enormous crevice between Indigenous and colonial law. Let's dive in.
There's a lot of things I'm upset about, and I think the best way to process through that is to try to make possibilities. So the major force for organizing our country is federalism. Provincial power under Section 92 of our Constitution, federal power under Section 91 of our Constitution, and all the power seems to be broken up or divided between those two different bodies. And Indians fall between the cracks of federalism. Basically, the province picks up a lot of the things that we should be doing on our own because there's a section of the Indian Act where the federal government says that's what the provinces can do. And then the federal government has the Indian Act and then fails to allow a further expansion of the way that we're living our lives. So basically, they've taken all the air out of the room. There's no place for our jurisdiction to come in. Part of what we're working on across the country is the idea that Indigenous peoples have their own jurisdiction. And it doesn't just come from the Constitution, it comes from our laws, as we've been talking about, it comes from our treaties. It can be recognized by our Constitution. And when that's the case, we can become a third order of government. It's not just the federal government or the provincial governments that have responsibilities. We have responsibilities for ourselves. We're talking about law in ways that make sense to us. I do see that as our future. If we can have this recognition of a space to be determining of what our future is, that is fair. That's democratic. That is actually participatory. Rather than taking authority or responsibility away from people, but letting them exercise it for themselves, that's what we, I think, generally aspire to as Canadians. And that's what's being denied to Indigenous peoples because of the Indian Act. And our jurisdiction would enable us to come in and make our own mistakes as well as have our own possibilities for success. So one way of thinking about it then is this the first order of government. I mean, the first governments that were here were and are Indigenous governance. We talked about the treaties that we had. Trying to live in accordance with that government, which allows us to be sustainable in the world, is something that's going to benefit not only Indigenous peoples, but other Canadians as well. If we find that all the moose and the deer and the caribou leave us, we're not going to be able to sustain ourselves. So this is a governance principle that's going to be beneficial for all people, not just Indigenous peoples. So stories do open doors, but you have to be a little bit familiar with what hallway you're walking down. Like if you go sit in court and you listen to the stories that are there, you think, what are they talking about? Why are they using all these fancy words? Why is it so kind of restricted in the way that they're communicating with one another? And likewise, if you've never been around an Anishinaabe storytelling tradition, you might say, why did that guy just tell a story about crows and talking with deer? Well, there's a protocol there which helps to organize the pattern, which gives us some certainty around what we would do with those stories to apply them in our lives now. We have to define ourselves from how we act. And Anishinaabewin is a language of verbs, about 80% verbs. I've often thought about one of my favorite words, which is the word for blueberry pie, which is putting berries on bread, leaning over, putting that bread in the oven and watching it explode. Right? What we're doing there is describing the action of making the bread. Right? It's not a noun. A blueberry pie is not a thing. It's a thing you do. And so if we think about our language in that way, there's the act, right? It's in the language. It's what we do. The Indian Act is trying to get us to live by someone else's rules. It's trying to replace our way of behaving with someone else's ways. It's also a very narrow way of behaving. It really restricts our opportunities to govern, to hold land, to make decisions about things that are important to us. Again, it's designed to make us behave like people in 1876 in a very kind of repressed way.